Okay, so let's begin this lesson by adding a paragraph tag to our index HTML file. In the previous lesson, we programmatically added it in our browser. This time around, I want to make it permanently available in our file. So right here in our div, I'm just going to add a paragraph tag. And inside, I'm going to add some text like once upon a time. And another thing I want to do here is to add a class to this paragraph, and that class is going to be red text. Remember, we are in vanilla HTML right now. We are not in React, so we do not need to use class name. We can just use class. And when I save this, we're going to see the paragraph appear right here on the right-hand side. So what I want to do in this lesson is continue expanding upon the concepts we previously talked about. And this time around, instead of creating a visual element like a div or a paragraph, I want to use the DOM API to create a style element. Remember, we can use a style element in order to define valid CSS styles. So right here, for example, we are able to do something like this. We can add a style tag, and in here, we can define valid CSS selectors and properties. So we can target elements, we can target things by their ID, by their CSS class. We can define things like a red text CSS class to target the paragraph below. All of this is possible in an HTML file, and all of this is also possible programmatically with JavaScript, and that's what I want to do in this lesson. So what our goal is going to be to add a red text class that is going to simply set the color of the paragraph to red and to see that change reflect on screen. So here I'm going to open up our console. Once again, let's click Inspect. Let's go to Console. And I'll begin by using our create element method from the previous lesson to create a HTML style element. So once again, our method is called create element. It's going to be on the document object, and we give it a string with the HTML element that we want to create. In this case, I don't want a P, I want a style element. So I'm going to invoke the create element method, and that there is our style node. Once again, it does not exist yet anywhere in our document in the sense of it doesn't exist in the interface, but it exists as this JavaScript object representing something that could eventually be in our interface. So I'm going to press the up arrow key, and I'm going to assign this node, this JavaScript object, to a constant called style element. All right. Now, the next thing I want to do is fill in this style element with a valid CSS declaration. In order to do that, we're actually going to need to use another method available on document, which is called create text node. And as you might imagine, the create text node doesn't create an HTML element, but it creates a node representing a piece of text. And that's ultimately what we want to inject between the opening and the closing style tag, or opening and closing style element. We want text that represents a valid CSS declaration. So right here, I'm going to provide a string, and that string is going to be a valid CSS declaration. So we know that to target a element by its CSS class in CSS, we can use the dot. So if I want to target the red text class, I'm going to do dot red dash text. And then we provide a pair of curly braces, just like we do in a regular CSS file or within a style tag. And here, let's add the CSS property of color, and let's just set it to red. And I'm also going to add the semicolon since that's considered best practice in CSS, right? So we have this text node that represents some text that is valid CSS, and that's going to be its own node. And I'm going to assign this to its own variable or constant. I'm just going to call it styles. Const styles. All right, so we have a style element that has nothing within it. It kind of exists on its own. And then we have this separate text node that has the CSS styles defined within it as plain text. I obviously now want to merge the two or combine the two. I want to essentially paste this content inside the opening and closing style tag right here. So we saw in the previous lesson that we can call the append child method on a node, and that's going to inject whatever you specify within the opening and closing tags for that element. So I'm going to take my style element, and I'm going to invoke append child, and I'm going to provide my text node represented by my styles constant. I'm going to do that. And so now if I output style element, you're going to see we have a valid style HTML element with that text node located between it, right? Now, this is still not anywhere in our user interface, but we are building up to eventually do that. The next thing we want to do, of course, is to attach this style element to our actual document. And a great place to do that would be, for example, in our head right here. That's typically where we define style tags, right? So we need to target our existing interface, and we can no longer use a method like getElementById because our head element right here does not have an ID. We need to actually target it by its HTML element rather than by something like its ID. Luckily, the document object has a method called querySelector, and that allows us to target an HTML element by its name. And querySelector is going to find the first occurrence of it. Keep in mind, you have to be careful with this because, for example, if you provide a string here like div, querySelector will find the first div node. So if you have 10 divs in your document, it's going to find the first one. Now, for something like head, this is perfect because there's only going to be one head anyway in our HTML document. So we're going to guarantee that we're going to find the right one. So right here, I can pass in a string of head, and you'll notice it's going to find the head element. If I hover my mouse over it, we're not going to see any visual output on the screen because the head doesn't show up on the screen. There's nothing visual to see, right? It's all metadata and title and things like that. However, we can still take this node that we have queried using the querySelector method, and we can assign it to its own constant. I'm just going to call that head element. All right. And now we have all the pieces. We have this style HTML element. Inside it, we have the valid text for a CSS declaration. And now all I want to do is take my head element and append a child, or in other words, add an additional thing between its opening and closing tag. And that is going to be our style element. And as soon as we add that style element, the red text CSS class will be valid, which in turn will affect our paragraph on the interface that has that class of red text, and thus in turn will turn it red. So right here, I'm going to take my head element. I'm going to invoke the append child method on it because I want to add something between its opening and closing tags. I want to add my style element. My style element is already nesting its own text node as a child, but it goes all the way down because it's just parents that have children, that have children, that have children. It goes all the way down. It's basically a tree data structure. And once I execute this code, ta-da, we now have our paragraph text appearing in red. And more importantly, just to show you how this affected our actual DOM and our tree, if I go to the Elements tab, we can see that if I expand my head right here, we have exactly what we expect. We have appended this child of a style element that has this text node of red text. So now this style activates and it's able to affect this paragraph right here that has the red text CSS class that we declared right here. So what is the key takeaway of this lesson? Well, once again, we're learning about the power of programmatic JavaScript and how it can build up the complete user interface. We learned in the previous lesson that JavaScript can create elements. It can also remove elements. And now we can see that JavaScript also has the power to do things like add CSS styles. Once again, by using code, by using programming. We didn't do anything in our original HTML file. We wrote everything in the console, which is effectively a JavaScript execution environment. Everything we did to make this CSS style change on screen, we did with JavaScript, right? All of these functionalities already exist in the core language, and all that React is doing is just adding another wrapper around this functionality to enable the exact same behavior, to enable a very bare bones HTML document, and then allowing the JavaScript to take over and take care of all future DOM updates and manipulations. All right, so hopefully we're understanding the how and the why under the hood that kind of led to the development of React. All of this was possible before React. React just kind of perfected it, if you will. All right, that's all there's to cover in this lesson, so I will see you in the next one.